I love it. All right.
Velva, I'm going to start in just a minute. I wanted to also let you know, first of all, you're muted, so don't forget that. And then I'm going to, after I introduce you, I'm going to turn my camera off until a point where if there are questions in the chat, so you'll see me pop back onto the screen if we have questions from the audience. And then, yeah, then I'll close us out at the very end. So
Okay, thank you.
All right, I'm gonna get us kicked off then. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. I'm Natalie English, President and CEO of the Wilmington Chamber of Commerce. Very excited to kick off the second in a series of workshops we're offering this month that come after an event we held in August, an event titled How to Have Hard Conversations About Money, Race, and Mental Health. I'm really grateful that we could bring those conversations to you in a little more detail this month, and grateful to Velva Jenkins for moderating this conversation today. I will introduce her in just a moment, but I wanted to be sure that I thank our sponsors, because sponsors are very helpful to our organization as we tackle tough issues like diversity, equity, and inclusion, like talent, pipeline management, and workforce development, education, all of the things that we do. It's our sponsors of events like this that help us do those things. So thank you to Piedmont Natural Gas, to Cloudwise, and to Warden Smith PA, a law firm that those three have all sponsored this series of events. We also want to encourage attendees, use the chat function to ask questions throughout, and when there are breaks in the conversation, I will pop back in to help Velva moderate those questions. So let's all sit back and enjoy this conversation. So now to introduce Velva Jenkins, most of you in this region know who she is, and she really doesn't need an introduction, but she certainly deserves one. She has done amazing work in our region on behalf of businesses, especially in Brunswick County, through Brunswick Community College, through the Small Business Center, supporting entrepreneurs, really a lot of investment in business success in Brunswick County, and also as a partner to other entities in the region to support business growth. And most recently, she's now the president and CEO of the YWCA of the Cape Fear region here in Wilmington. And we are so grateful that as she is helping to advance the mission of the YWCA, that she has the time to invest in helping the rest of us in the work that we're trying to undertake with regard to race relations, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Velva, I will hand the program over to you. Thank you so much.
And thank you, Natalie. It is my pleasure to be the moderator for today's segment on managing difficult conversations. You know, many African Americans today remain located in communities with the lowest opportunities for upward mobility. There are U.S. policies that determine where people live and the opportunities people have in these communities. Now, businesses that recruit and retain a diverse workforce understand the critical role these workers play in their company's ability to adapt, grow, and sustain a competitive advantage in modern business landscape. It is also known that success in business is tied in with social issues. It is as if there are two bottom lines: social impact and social impact and profitability. You cannot have one without the other. Social enterprises are small, but they are growing in number, along with issues such as environment, poverty, drugs, trafficking, mental health and homelessness, and equality. Today's panelists will focus on economic activity and race relation, how good race relation impacts good business operations, and how success in business is tied in with social issues. It is my pleasure to introduce our panelists for today. First, I would like to introduce Dr. Harris, Herbert Harris. He is the CEO of the LifeSkill Institute, Inc., and the author of Resolving Race Issues in America. The Honorable Sandra Spaulding-Hughes, my good friend, is a former member of the North Carolina House of Representatives and a principal of LifeSkill Institute, Inc. We also have with us Dr. Dennis Rogers. He's a 20 years veteran as a community development organizer and social entrepreneur. And last but not least, we have Dr. Sherry Rogers. To begin this dialogue, let me ask the first question to Dr. Harris. Do you believe one of the functions of government is redistributing wealth so that everyone gets a share of society's goods?
Well, that's a great question, Velva. And first, I'd definitely like to thank you for having us come aboard. And I think that the YWCA has been at the cornerstone for overcoming racism, improving race relations, developing those relationships that change the world. And thank the Chamber, because it's very interesting. The Chamber has been very aggressively involved in creating a more inclusive society and an inclusive business environment. And as we go on, I'll share an interesting fact that I was involved with the Chamber 20 years ago when they were developing this initiative, and it's probably its first evolution. So the question you asked was an interesting one, because you know, government has a lot of power over providing economic, you might say economic wherewithal. But I think the main thing the government should do is to make sure there's a level playing field. That I think that most people, white, black, brown, most people want to achieve success, but the playing field may not be level. When we look at the historic systemic racism in America that we are struggling with right now, then it's very challenging to favor one group over another. But if we can say, look, from this point forward, and it's interesting, you can't change the past, but I think government's job is to level the playing field and ensure that everybody has an equal opportunity and equal tools. You know, sometimes when you have been, you might say, deprived or excluded from the mainstream of business, you may not have all the tools necessary. When we worked with facilitating business groups getting together on the concept of inclusion, we found that a lot of the black groups or the black business people had not had the opportunity, for example, to really master the proposal process for submitting bids and things like that. So that may be something that needs to be done extra, but on the overall sense, the government must make sure that the playing field is level and that everybody has a good shot at achieving their goals.
Okay. Does anybody other the panelists would like to chime in on that question? Is anything else that would like to be said? Okay, well, let's go to the next one. What does it take to create a positive, inclusive business environment? I mean, here we are talking about the Chamber of Commerce. They're made up of all sizes and businesses, all types of businesses, from service to retail, you name it, they're here at the Chamber. So what are some of the positive it takes to be create a positive and inclusive business environment?
Well, I'll tell you just as a start, Velva, that it requires intention. It requires that there be a will to create that inclusive environment, number one. It requires leadership. number two. And then it requires the resources. One of the things that that we did, I guess now almost 20 years ago, 22 years ago, the Chamber, for example, had a strong initiative. In 1998, it was the 100th anniversary of the coup of 1898, and the Chamber saw the inequities in the system, in the economic arena, and they launched a program, and it was called Partners for Economic Inclusion. And one of the goals there was to foster dialogue, foster building relationships, and to really discuss what each group's, one, their version of their vision of the world, but also their needs. Many times we don't have a sense for what the other person needs. There's a great phrase that says, to understand my issues, you need to walk a mile in my moccasins. And so when we got together with that whole process, the Partners for Inclusion, an important part of it was for the Black businessmen to share some of their needs, some of their concerns, the white businessmen to do the same. And what we found was they had completely different conceptions. You know, it's almost like Marie Antoinette. If you remember, they said, someone told her that, oh, the people have no bread. And she said, well, let them eat cake. And so it was a lack of awareness. And so in these exchanges, Black businesses got a chance to share their perspective, and white businesses got a chance to learn more about their perspective. And so in these type of things will help create the environment to create a more inclusive economic region.
Now, when you started off, Dr. Harris, you mentioned leadership. How do you foster leadership?
Now, that's a great point. You know, we were talking about that a little earlier, and Dr. Rogers had shared some information about that. That idea of leadership it of course requires a couple of things. I'll just sort of take a little from that. Leadership requires a vision of how you would like it to be. As they said in the Bible, it says, where there's no vision, the people perish. And so leadership requires a vision, and it requires certain, you might say, specific elements. And so first they must have that vision. Then they must have the respect for people to follow them. And then they must have the diligence to hang in there and get it done. Maybe Dr. Rogers, you could share a little bit about what we were talking about with leadership earlier.
Thank you so much.
Excellent, thank you.
I'm sorry, you're talking about, we both are Dr. Rogers.
Well, what I'll do, let's go with Dr. Dennis first, and then I'll come.
Of course.
Thank you, and I echo the sentiment of Dr. Harris. Thank you to the board. Someone has their sound on, and if they could just hit mute. So there's a magazine, it's entitled Governing, and it's the magazine of governors, city and municipal leaders. And as we know right now, there's a transition, or transitions are taking place around the country with respect to leadership. And so they listed kind of the top 5 points of a great leader in a governorship position or a city or municipality. And they're evaluated on 5 things. One is finances, how in fact are finances handled with integrity, etc. 2 is shared prosperity. Is there an increase in trust and in mutual benefit among all citizens of a particular municipality? The 3rd one is infrastructure. Has the infrastructure improved in that geographic location as a marker, a data point on whether or not there's been good leadership? The additional one, 4, and Dr. Harris, I'm gonna ask you to come in with number 5 again, is regional connectivity. And that is, to what degree, I was asking the chamber staff earlier, how connected is the chamber within the region? And they were pointing out to me that Hanover County, that Wilmington plays the larger part of Hanover County. And then there was a fifth point. Dr. Harris, are you with me on this fifth point that we discussed earlier?
That was the idea of a shared property, a shared vision, that in pulling all that together was a shared vision of how everyone saw those pieces working, the finance, the infrastructure, all that, because without that shared vision of how it fits together, that's how discrimination and racism takes place. But Velva, I wanted, when you asked that question about leadership, one of the reasons I wanted Dr. Shari, I'm going to do it like that, Dr. Shari, to share with us. She is a producer of a film called Shared Legacy, and it's about the role of the joint venture between the Black community and the Jewish community in the early civil rights struggle. And one of the great stories she shared with us was the idea of, after Dr. King had received the Nobel Prize, how leadership in Atlanta in the business community was able to really create something there that continues to this day. So maybe Dr. Shari. Yes.
Yeah. So thank you so much. So honored to be on this esteemed panel and very grateful. But just briefly, in terms of the leadership in the 60s, Rabbi Rothschild, who was very connected to the Mayor Ivan Allen and the business field, was very upset that Dr. Martin Luther King, that he was working closely with, had received the Nobel Peace Prize award, and nobody was honoring him with a dinner. They had never had an integrated dinner before. So they kept meeting with the business meetings over and over again. And finally, Coca-Cola said, we have to do something. They weren't selling, so finally when Coca-Cola got involved, and it took all these meetings in terms of leadership to finally bring the proper dinner to Dr. Martin Luther King. And yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. And I wanted to share that because that's an excellent instance of how the business community can stimulate change. And yes,
I just want to add one part. Rabbi Rothschild worked very closely with Dr. Martin Luther King and resulting in the temple being bombed. But fast forward, Rabbi Berg right now is working with Reverend Raphael Warnock, who, God willing, is going to be coming into Congress right now, and it's close over there. But I'm saying that relationship matters, whether it happens in Congress or leadership. It's still building. Excellent. and building on the backs of very important people that work together. So I think as we're moving forward with the world looking at racism, we have to remind ourselves of coalition partnerships that can help move this forward.
Beautiful, thank you.
And I want to bring out one other point in this question. What does it take to create a positive, inclusive business environment? And Dr. Harris, you mentioned intention, leadership, and resources. Can you elaborate a little bit on the resources needed?
Well, it's very interesting, Velva, because the resources give you the tool. So often we have groups that operate on a volunteer basis. Okay? And the reason they call it a volunteer army, but they get paid. Okay, it's a volunteer to join. And so resources are important to provide staff, to provide all of the supporting things to help bring about this inclusive society. A lot of the work that the Chamber is doing right now with some of the workshops, and on the website, I've seen some of the workshops that they're doing, et cetera, that it's important to be able to have resources, for example, to bring a person in to teach grant writing, or to be able to have a person, they often say, if you want to get a job done, assign it to somebody. If you want it to not get done, then ask for a volunteer, okay? But when you have the resources, it does two things. It provides the tools, but also it's a confirmation. They often say, put up or shut up. Okay? So many times people will talk about, we want to make change, we want to do this, but when it comes to putting it on the line, then that's that kind of resource that's needed. So the resources are monetary resources, social resources, if Coca-Cola had not stepped up in Dr. King's situation, if it might not have happened, but Coca-Cola had a lot of social capital. Okay, so the resources is not just monetary, but social capital, respect. So many times it's who says it that makes a difference.
Great, great. Now we talked about the creative positive, what creates a positive, inclusive business environment. Now what are the impediments of creating an inclusive business environment?
I tell you,
we can't discuss one without the other.
I say, you got the questions. Well, there are a couple of things. One of the main impediments is that lack of relationship.
Number one.
Number one.
Relationship.
And then the idea, the business community operates like a two-edged sword sometimes. There's always a strong relationship in the business community. But that relationship goes both ways. For example, there's sometimes that the business community says they want to be the driver. And so they'll step up in a leadership position that may even go against the grain of what people perceive as the social environment. And one of the great examples is Nike. When Colin Kaepernick was having, he was being beat down, he couldn't get a job because he chose to express his displeasure with the racial condition by kneeling. And of course, he lost his income, etc. But one of the things that changed that whole dynamic, Nike basically endorsed his position, gave him a position, gave him a platform, gave him some money, and that turned the corner. Now, at first, that impediment of being the only one out there, I'm the only one kneeling there. There are 60,000 people on the stage, in the stadium and on the playing field, and I'm the only one kneeling. That's an impediment. Okay. But when Nike stepped up and said, hey, we believe in what he's doing, and we believe in the Black Lives Matter movement, as a matter of fact. People said they were going to boycott Nike, but now you look back 2 years later, Nike's stock is up, their business is booming, and so it was a good business decision to do the right thing. So if that's an impediment, that's how that particular impediment was overcome. The other side of that impediment now is when business takes the other avenue. Example, in the bus boycott, in that way, business was not proactive, business was reactive. It took a year of people not riding the bus for business to say, maybe we need to change. We need to look at this. And so sometimes business can lag behind and literally almost facilitate some of the negative things that are happening. And so this impediment, this fact that, number one, that you don't have the type of broad range support that when you step up, many of us, everybody believes in the golden rule. So when somebody steps up to say, hey, you're treating this person badly, why should that be brave? Why shouldn't that just be the norm? You should say, hey, you're right, man. We forgot who we are for a minute and we're treating them badly. So, why should that be right? So that's a serious impediment. Any other thoughts on that?
Well, Dennis Rogers looked like he was getting ready to put something in there. So let's give him an opportunity to share.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce on their home website, they have a link to a report written by the W.K. Kellogg Foundation. And the title of the report is, and I want to give you the exact title, so forgive me if I toss my notes here for a moment. The title is The Business Case for Racial Equity, a Strategy for Growth. And literally, they speak to the fact that in 2050, the U.S. economy will grow to the tune of $8 trillion if, in fact, it is an inclusive economy. And so, Wilmington's element of that or portion of that 8 trillion, I'm sure you have economists there that can do the math. But it says that in order to grow the economy equitably, the disparities must be discontinued in health, in education, in incarceration, and in employment. And if you're on wherever you are, if you are able to go online and look up this report, it speaks to investment in these areas, specifically in a preventive manner as a way to grow the economy. For example, it gives one of the culminating points is that local chambers of commerce can support smart physical allocations to align resources to the highest need among the population. Another one is to keep children in school after expulsion and things of that nature through restorative justice, so that from an early age, children are able to work their way back into society, into the economy, and to be a part of the economy. A third one, and I'll conclude with this one for now and revisit this list, is to address the root cause of health disparities in the community. Because we know when we have a healthy community, we have a healthy workforce, a healthy entrepreneurial class, and we can grow a healthy economy.
With those comments, Dr. Rogers, is that what you're painting a picture of what Wilmington should look like as an inclusive business environment? Can you kind of tell us about paint us a picture of what that would look like?
And I think that those of us in Wilmington can do a wonderful job of painting the picture of what an inclusive Wilmington can look like. And I'm outside of Wilmington, so I'll just speak generally speaking, and it may be applicable to Wilmington. And I think the business leaders listening, as well as those on the line, can speak more specifically to Wilmington. So we know that every day, right now, children aren't going to school, but we know that children have aftercare time. Is that time utilized productively, or are they sitting in front of the television? So there's a time opportunity there to invest in young people such that they grow into the economy with new technology, with new opportunities that are emerging in, for example, artificial intelligence or the other areas of growth that Wilmington Chamber of Commerce have identified they want to grow in, pharmaceutical, sales, things of this nature. An inclusive environment means that although our individual families may be healthy, we recognize that there are unhealthy families in our community, and we take steps to create the space and the resources available to move people from unhealthy behavior and habits to healthy behavior and habits that then can be applied again in the workforce and in the entrepreneurial class. And lastly, there is a level of intentionality, which Dr. Harris spoke to directly, in growing the entrepreneurial class within the community. Yes, you can go outside of the community and recruit others in, but you have a great talent. I looked at your university and colleges and community college system there. You have talent that is in the area. Why not grow them to grow the area's economy?
And you know, Velva, one of the things that outcomes of the last, and for those new, let me just give a quick background of how we tried to create an inclusive business environment in Wilmington 20 years ago. When the Chamber recognized that the 1898 centennial was a dark chapter, that was a dark chapter in the history of Wilmington that had been hidden, they decided to bring it out. Because I grew up in Wilmington, I didn't know about it, and I ain't the dumbest doll in the church, but I mean, I went to college, have a couple of degrees, and I had never heard about it. And so the Chamber, in this Partners for Economic Inclusion, said, let's go out and let's first start these discussion groups. And let's make it broad enough so that we can hear from the churches. We had Mrs. Todd, and I'm sure you were a part of that, conducted, Miss Bertha Todd conducted discussion groups in the churches. It was in the businesses. BB&T was at that time, they were on 3rd and Chestnut, and they had a huge boardroom. They had 100 people on their board, but they had a huge boardroom, And we used to come up there to get insight on bidding, on how to put in a bid, on dealing with your insurance requirements. And so that was a powerful piece. And then the university chimed in with the housing authority, because it was such a holistic approach that you said something very powerful, Dr. Rogers, that the children are the future. And if they build prisons based on the third grade population, then we need to change that. And so a part of that initiative was to go into the housing authority, into the projects. Sandra and I used to go and we would do, we call it parent empowerment training. We didn't teach how to be a better parent. We said, let me help you become a better person. And so that inclusive business community, what could it look like? I tell you, that was so close. You know, as they say, this time we almost made it. It was so close because we had the captains of industry here. We had all of the city executives from the banks sitting down with the guys who had a little cleaning company and saying, well, the banks have got to be clean. Okay, how do you get a contract to clean the bank? And so we had those people sitting down and communicating now and building that relationship so that when Joe came from the cleaning company now, he was recognized. Hey, Joe, how are you? Here's my paper right now. They didn't give him any extra, you know, kudos for being Joe, but they gave him a fair shot at it, and his proposal was accepted, and he got good business from it. So, an inclusive society is where there's that direct communication and support between the businesses, where we learn about our history, not to intimidate, but to educate, where we recognize some of the vestiges of the problems of slavery and discrimination, segregation, to make capital available, you know. And, you know, many times you say, well, if you don't have a credit score of 800, you can't get a loan. Well, that just about eliminates everybody I know. Okay. So to look at it, to look at some of the other variables, maybe, you know, that worked for them, but to look at other variables like their heart, their intent, their track record. That one company we were working with had been cleaning for over 20 years. And it never really had a big contract. And I think they ended up getting one with the university.
They did.
So that's kind of that vision of how it could be. Dr. Shire, you had something to say? No.
You're on mute. You're on mute.
You're on mute.
Sorry, I don't know if you ever read the book by Bishop Rodney Sampson. It's called Kingonomics. And he's doing an amazing job. He's from Atlanta, but his book is based on the King philosophy of economics. And he trains, you know, all the young college kids, and it's based on these 11 principles. And I think I would just recommend possibly maybe inviting him on to go over his economic book based on the King philosophy.
Velva?
Yes.
Under the aspect of economic inclusion that we did some 20 years ago, building relationships were of utmost importance at that time, because because of 1898 had not been talked about, had not come to the forefront, nobody knew what to say about it until we came to the table. And as Dr. Sherry Rogers mentioned about Dr. Martin Luther King, sometimes we have to take the time to come to the table. And that's what we did with economic inclusion. We didn't physically feed people, but we went to the 5th floor at the bank, and that was, quote, our feeding site, indirectly, that we brought all of the folks together. And when we brought them together, they were the leaders, of course. We had a vision. We talked about economic development, but quite often we don't build relationships. And that's what we did with economic inclusion. We built the relationships between the head CEOs, the sponsors. As you mentioned today, you have sponsors for your program, and we cannot do anything without money. Even in politics, you gotta have money to make it happen. So we made it happen in all areas that Dr. Dennis Rogers listed a few moments ago. You gotta have all 5 of them to bring together to make the economic inclusion work.
And thank you, Sandra, for bringing us to this point, because I want to ask you, what do you think the Chamber can do to encourage racial harmony? And you talked about the discussion groups, but let's talk about not just the discussion groups, but let's talk about the partners for inclusion. How do you develop partners for inclusion as well?
Well, of course, there has to be a leader who will be there, and that's what we identified. Dr. Harris mentioned that we had several heads of departments, and we targeted heads of departments who, quote, were leaders at that time. And we had a strategic plan, long-term, and we had to bring people together who had never come together with issues that were brought to the forefront. For example, we met some contractors out of Raleigh. I don't recall the exact name, but they heard about us, they became interested, and they studied about the contracts. How do you get a contract? How much does it cost? Do I have insurance? Or I didn't get this job because I lack insurance, or I lack skill sets that might be needed. And quite often we can actually teach skill sets that many people do not have. Companies assume that workers, whoever, might have these skill sets, and they do not. So quite often, if the Chamber can educate the constituents or the persons that they want to draw in to make the economic inclusion situation greater, then sometimes they have to educate the folks out in the community who lack the knowledge of how to develop whatever it is that they might be developing. Even to cleaning, with the gentleman that we worked with, he had never had a huge contract before because he had never communicated and sat to the table to say, I can make this happen with anyone.
And you know, Velva, it's interesting. I want to share one thing with you. How to scale up. You know, many of the Black businesses have been nice, small businesses, but gosh, what happens when you do get a big contract? Right. And that was something that somebody who's been there had to teach. I think one of the things that made it successful was the Chamber, and those of us, there was a Black Chamber of Commerce at the time. We decided that if people are going to believe in it, if it's going to have credibility, it had to be from the top down. And so I remember the chancellor at UNCW was a part. I think Jack Bartow, the head of the hospital, was a part. One of the top people from Corning was a part. The chairman of the, the superintendent of schools was a part. Even the head of the Department of Social Service and the Housing Authority were parts. And the thing, what it said, it sent a message not just to the community, but to their structures. So many times the leadership is what they see the leaders do, people follow. And so the success of the Partners for Economic Inclusion was that it was a top-down thing. And then one of the goals was to have permanence after it was over. So many times we get projects going and everybody gets excited and we do it. But I know one of the direct results of that was, I know at UNCW now, they have a person who's in charge of with inclusion in the contract process, in the bidding process. And so the idea to have that inclusive society is to have people whose job it is to be inclusive, that it's not a byproduct, but it's a stated goal. And when that happened in Wilmington, we're still getting the benefits of it. I think the lesson from it is, though, when you start something like that, you have to keep doing it. It never gets to a point where like we've solved it and it's done. You know, it's like a flower. You can have like a garden, you can have the most beautiful garden. Sandra's a gardener. She has beautiful gardens. But if she doesn't go out there every other day and pull up those weeds, that garden is gone. And so whatever we do, whatever the outcome of this conversation, and I hope we do have some action items, but the outcome is to recognize that it must be institutionalized to the point where it goes on and it becomes somebody's job to make it happen.
And I guess that's why I don't garden, Sandra, is because I can't get out there every other day. Forget that. We have a question in the chat box. Natalie, I see you're on. Do you want to address that, or do you want me to take that question and provide it to share it with the panelists?
So I would just love to touch base with the panelists and say thank you for all of the kudos that you've given the chamber as an institution in Wilmington. The interesting thing is, Megan Mullins and I are sort of chatting on the side via text. As Dr. Harris was just pointing out, the people who were involved and engaged kind of didn't stay involved and engaged. And so I really want to give a shout out right now to the leadership and the membership of the Wilmington Chamber's African American Business Council, because they are stepping up and following. Some of them were young professionals back when the Partners for Economic Inclusion were doing its work. And so they're trying to pick up that mantle, if you will, and to do some of that work through the chamber again. And we're certainly partnering with them and really pleased to be in that space. But Dr. Harris, you are so right. If someone doesn't stay involved, then they become projects and not initiatives. And so I hope we learn that we need to stay better engaged. And I'm sorry to interrupt the conversation, but I just wanted to say thank you for reminding us to stay focused on this work.
My pleasure, because it was a singular thing. I've seen it around the country, and I don't know that any other chambers really, well, I guess they didn't have to deal with 1898 either. So, but that any other chamber really said, this is what we're gonna do, and got it done.
So I was on the U.S. Chamber of Commerce's website, and they actually have a list of best practices, and they have case studies from various chambers. And this notion, I take it that they rotate those annually or biannually, but what we're discussing sounds like a case study for how it can be done correctly. And the question becomes, if it's being done for 5 years, or it's a 10-year or a 20-year initiative, or if it's looked at as something that needs to be done into perpetuity. Because again, we talked about the report from the Kellogg Foundation said that the economy will grow to the tune of $8 trillion by 2050. That's a 30-year trajectory projection. The question becomes, how far out is the Wilmington community interested in projecting its future in growth, as opposed to its future as a flat line on these types of issues?
Good point.
I would also like to say that each chamber member, even the ones that are listening today, those that will maybe catch this later in a YouTube format or whatever, can play a significant role in initiating a discussion on race. What one thing can each panelist share that they could use as a tool to initiate discussion on race?
I'm gonna say ladies first.
Well, I'm going to have to get off, and I'm so appreciative to Dr. Harris and everybody to invite me, but I'm hoping our film Shared Legacies is being used community to community to show that there is a template in history where coalition building actually worked to transform the conscience of America and get the Voting Rights Act from top down, as Dr. Harris was saying, whether it was working with the mayors, having meetings, lawyers involved, strategic organizations. I mean, this didn't just happen. There was so much strategy involved, and that strategy was built on coalitions. So I'm hoping that as we move forward, that I think this idea of partnership and working together becomes a necessary component of building businesses and being vital and dealing with racism globally. And having conferences. I mean, actually tomorrow there's going to be, is it tomorrow? It's next week. They're using our film with the World Congress to train their delegates how to build bridges globally. So, I mean, I think the world is really looking at how to, attack racism. And now is this wonderful opportunity to build those bridges to the benefit of each of your communities. So thank you very much. I'm going to have to get off, but God bless. Thank you.
God bless. Thank you.
Thank you.
Velva?
Yes,
Yes.
go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yes,
Sandra?
regarding building relationships, Dr. Sherry Rogers mentioned the number one statement is coalition and building relationships. And before you came CEO of the YWCA, we had a coalition building series. It's not to the degree that it is now, but we built racial relationships by coming to the table, just as Sherry mentioned. Dr. Martin Luther King needed a dinner because Black folks and white folks had never sat at the same table together. So we need now to build coalitions with the chamber and with all of the other entities to come to the table, remain at the table, and build relationships. And it's all about relationships. And I'll give this short example here of an incident that happened to me years ago when I was hospitalized at Chapel Hill Hospital for 6 weeks. And I was on the floor where organ donors, where the organ donations came into my floor. No one ever said to the person receiving the heart, did it come from a Black person? Did it come from a white person? Did it come from India? Did it come from Africa? All this person wanted to know, will I get a heart? That to me made a major change in the behavior of the individual receiving that heart, because quite often they wanted to go and find the person who gave them that heart to continue their life. So it sounds simple, but it changed the behavior of every individual that I saw who received an organ, whatever it was. So racism is the thing to me that is in the eye of the beholder. So we have a nationwide project to educate people about racism.
Dr. Rogers.
Yes, Melanie Hobson, who's married to George Lucas, she uses, language from the Star Wars trilogy, or I don't know, 15 different Star Wars now. And she says, in business, there is no try, there is only do. So when business decides and makes up its mind that it wants to tackle an issue, they are innovative and they figure out a way. If we look at the Treasury right now, Secretary Mnuchin has, if you're following him online, et cetera, he's had several discussions regarding racial matters, relieving racial tensions, revisiting the history of, for example, the Freedmen's Bank and how it was undermined. And then after identifying this historic issue, similar to what we're doing here with 1898, he puts forth, along with partners and others, objectives, goals to reach toward making it a more inclusive economy. And so I would dare say we started with the notion of intention. We know that businesses, when it comes to being profitable, there is no try, there is only do. So when it comes to being inclusive, that same type of mindset applies. And then it's a matter, as Ms. Sandra talked about, Hughes, of bringing people to the table to have those conversations and those collective planning sessions to move the collective economy with everyone included in it forward.
Wow. Thanks, Doc.
Yes, sir.
And Velva, as you were saying that, I saw a message pop up on the chat, and the message was, how would you measure success? And that was a powerful piece. And I think one of the keys to the previous success of the chamber, I was actually hired to facilitate a meeting. I think one of the things that the chamber realized then, and I think the world is realizing now, is that it has to be somebody's job to bring all of this out. So my first job in Wilmington was, I was hired as a facilitator to facilitate meetings. And we had actually 3 sets of meetings. We met with Black businessmen to say, hey, we're working into this arena of real business, big business, and this is how you present yourself. This is how we operate. we worked with the white businessmen and said, now we're going to be bringing people together. This is their expectations. You know, this is not your employee. Everybody in this room now is on an equal plane. So whether you're the president of so-and-so or the janitor of such and such, you're all in some kind of business, and it's a level playing field. And so one of the things that we did was to determine what was the measure of success, okay? Was it an increase in Black businesses and 5%? I don't know the makeup of the chamber now, but I know that the efforts to really expand and work with the African American Council is definitely laudable, because you want to determine where you are right now to see what are your metrics. How many Black businesses do you have? What are the skill set that they have? What are the goods and services that they offer? And so if we're coming together to create a more inclusive society, a business environment, it's important to what are the metrics, so that people's expectations now are in line with our obligations, with our promises, and then we create that more inclusive economy.
Dr. Harris, we have a couple of questions we want to get from the chat box. So let's kind of see if we can go ahead and briefly answer their questions. I would hate for them to participate and we don't address their questions.
Yes.
One says, I'm a white small business owner with 4 employees. How does someone like myself bring change about? Most of the conversation is concerning big businesses.
Mm-hmm. That's an excellent question, because every big business started somewhere as a small business. And really and truly, the bulk of the businesses that we really worked with were small businesses. The big businesses, the presidents and whatnot just validated the process. But the small businesses and interacting, for example, she has 4 employees, and just her getting to know some of the other businesses. What are her employee needs? Does she need somebody who can do A, B, C, and D? Can we connect her up with another company that does a joint venture thing? So it's really operating on all levels, but the small business level is where it actually happens, because these are the people who actually come out to the meetings and say, I'd like to learn this, I'd like to learn that, I need this, I need that. And so they would definitely be a major part of the equation, and really the focus, because most of the Black businesses are small businesses, okay? And so when we're talking about bringing minority of Black businesses into the fold and helping support them, I think they all have some of the same things as issues. I'm sure she needs capital. I'm sure she needs skilled employees. I'm sure she needs a location to do her work. And all of these things can be helped by an inclusive environment.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, in today's community, what organization do you feel need to come together to create a bridge in Wilmington, a bridge for racial divides?
Well, there's no one organization can spearhead it. Okay, somebody's got to spearhead it. And the chamber in the past was the one, okay? So somebody's got to spearhead it. The chamber is definitely a critical part. The university is a critical part, because you have you might say, the next generation of employees and the next generation of entrepreneurs right now in Cape Fear or UNCW. And so they're an important part. The city,
the governance,
the state, the politics is an important part. Sandra was here, but I know that she was on the film commission, and when she was collaborating with them, when she was on the State House of Representatives, she was able to pull the legislators together to maintain that film incentive, you know. And so the politicians have to be a part of it. And so it's to answer the question, it's a coalition of all of those: education, chamber, political, economic. Like some of the major employers can be a part of it too, but at least the chamber, the education. Oh, I'm sorry, I missed a critical one. The faith-based community. because so many of the people we found, most of us go to some kind of church, and it created a common ground that we could sort of work from. So those would be the groups I would say. The key though is somebody has to lead it.
And I would like to add to that, Dr. Harris, that we have a valuable resource right here in Wilmington. It's the YWCA. We have a lot of resources and connections and
Yes.
avenues for racial communication, having that hard communication and the resources. So make sure you include the YWCA when you're looking for guidance.
Well, you know, Velva, I have to apologize because the YMCA is the YWCA is the one group that has a stated purpose
Yes.
to eliminate racism.
Exactly.
And to achieve racial equity. And so you all would be right there with the chamber as co-producers almost, because
Correct.
that is your stated goal, and the chamber can see that bigger picture that stated
Right.
goal can multiply through.
Okay. And we have one more question, but I see Natalie is back, and maybe we can get this one more done and then we'll move on and we'll turn it back over to Natalie. But we have a question. The best way to measure the progress. How can you measure the progress?
And that we kind of answered that before, is you have to agree on metrics. You know, my concept of success may be different from yours, may be different from Natalie's. And so one of the key aspects of bringing together a coalition is to agree on a metric to develop and to compare and to measure your progress by.
And the researcher in me suggests that there have been other communities who've engaged in this process and who actually laid out for them what worked, what were their data points, and which of those data points became indicators in their metrics for growth. And so I think that, you know, some research can bear witness to what has been done out there. And then, of course, it can be uniquely tailored to the needs of Wilmington and the Wilmington community to grow. To the small white business owner, I'd like to say this. From my research limited, PPD is the biggest employer in Wilmington, or at least they're listed in the state listing as one of the biggest employers in the state and the biggest in Wilmington, although all their people may not be employed in Wilmington. So to be in their supply chain, but those types of organizations, large and small, all need to be at the table to come up with the solutions and the metrics that would allow you all to advance yourselves again to the year 2050, when there is a $8 trillion growth pattern that is occurring.
Thank you, Dr. Rogers. And I would like to thank Dr. Harris, Sandra Spaulding-Hughes, and also the other Dr. Sherry Rogers. And I also would like to thank the Chamber of Commerce for this opportunity. Natalie?
There were so many things that I wanted to jump in, and maybe I should have just stayed a part of that conversation. Dr. Harris and Sandra Spaulding-Hughes, you guys helped me and my team certainly learn a lot about some history because we weren't here in 1998. I'm proud of my predecessors. I'm sorry that we didn't keep that initiative going, because Dr. Rogers, I believe it is into perpetuity. At least until we don't have to have this conversation anymore, but I think that we do for the foreseeable future. And so as I look back at the successes of the African American Business Council, it is a coalition, Dr. Harris, and it includes the university and the community college and other representatives in our community, like those involved with SCORE, who can help small businesses, because we approach this at the Chamber in line with our vision. Our vision at the Chamber is to promote prosperity in our community by encouraging business growth. And so when I approached an African American business person in Wilmington about the idea, how do we do this for Black businesses? The first thing we did is knock on several church doors. We went into churches to talk to African American business owners with their pastors in the room. That I knew that was the way to build trust, and I knew that partly because that previous initiative it didn't fail. It just didn't keep going, right?
Yeah.
And I knew that there was a lack of trust whether we were serious, and there still is, right? We run into people all the time. I can tell you right now that I'm serious about this. It matters to me because I know, Dr. Rogers, that economic growth needs to be inclusive, and I believe that to my core. So I want to thank you all so much for joining us today, for educating us a little bit about the history, for educating us about continued ways that we can build coalitions and make a difference in our particular community as that can also relate to changing the world. I have friends who ask me all the time, when are you going to solve world peace? I'm working on it every day. So it's certainly my desire. And then I want to especially thank our sponsors, Piedmont Natural Gas, Warden Smith, and Cloudwise. Without them, we wouldn't have been able to bring this webinar series to our group. I'd love to encourage you, our panelists, as well as all of those attending, to join us next Thursday at 4 p.m. when we talk about mental health. This is a year of isolation, and it's been a year of loss without the ability to console each other. And so we're going to talk about mental health and how do you have that conversation and what can you do about it when you start to see signs in yourself or someone you care about that they may need to do something about their mental health. So we invite you to join us again, and thank you all. Have a great evening.
Thank you so much, Natalie,
for the invitation.
And we're going to get you a copy of our book.
Good.
Anybody who's working on solving the race issue in America, our book was written as a primer, a short book to help people understand the history, the dynamics, and some of the ways to go forward. So, Solving the Race Issue in America by H.J. Harris, and it's available on Amazon, ebook, paperback, but I'm going to make sure to get you a copy.
Thank you. Will you sign it for me?
Yes, I will.
Thank you. Thank you. Dr.
Good.
Rogers, thank you so much for joining us from the nation's capital.
You're welcome.